Overview of camera and exposure. This is digital photography, and I'm Gina Dabrowski. Things to know about your digital camera. How to manually set the following: the ISO, manual exposure, focus, and turning off the flash. First, we need to turn the camera on and off. Locate the power switch on your camera. Be sure to turn off the camera when not in use, otherwise the batteries may go dead. Camera settings. We're going to talk about ISO, aperture, shutter, focus, white balance. We will use our camera on manual throughout the semester. A star means you should take notes. It may be on the quiz. The ISO is the sensor's sensitivity to light. On a digital camera, generally it is automatically adjusted according to the light, unless you manually set it. Here you can see the camera is set to ISO 6400. So the ISO is the numerical rating of the sensor. 400 is faster and responds to less light. So that's really good for outdoors. 100 is slower and needs more light for exposure. I got that backwards. 400 is better for indoors and 100 is better for outdoors. So the ISO represents a sensor's sensitivity to light. A low number like 100 or 200 means that it will need outdoor light to give you a good exposure. Here we can see the difference between ISO 200 and 3200. The difference is clear. The image on the right side is set at 3200 and it has a lot more noise. That noise looks like little pebbles of sand. Compared to the one on the left, which is ISO 200, that's nice and smooth. So here's some hands-on. Get your camera and set the ISO on your camera. So everyone set your ISO to 400. The location may be in the menu as a manual setting, but don't worry if you cannot set this. Your camera will automatically set it for you. For those of you with a DSLR, the hands-on is for you to set your ISO. So set it to 400. That way you can shoot both indoors and outdoors. The location for the setting may be on the top or the back of your camera. The lens has aperture settings. It's called aperture setting or f-stop. The lens lets light into the camera. On a digital camera, the lens function can be invisible because there are no dials to change the f-stops. Here's what an aperture looks like. It controls how much light enters your camera. More light enters the camera at f2.8, and that's where you would set it when you're indoors. And at f22, less light enters the camera, which is where you would set it if you're outside. Think of the aperture like the lens in your eye. So when you're indoors, your eye pupil is wide open to let in as much light as possible because it can be rather dim when you're indoors. But as soon as you step outdoors, your eye pupil stops way down so that it can help to block out some of the light, just like f22. So indoors, we set the lens to f2.8 or wide open. If you don't have control, don't worry, you can skip this. The shutter speed. The shutter lets light into the camera in fractions of a second. The shutter opens and closes. When you're indoors, you want that shutter to be at a 30th of a second or a 60th of a second. And when you're outdoors, you set it to 1/125th or 1/250th of a second. So the camera shutter is a curtain in front of the camera sensor that stays closed until the camera fires, or you push the shutter. When the camera fires, the shutter opens and fully exposes the camera sensor to the light that passes through the lens aperture. So the shutter speed is the amount of time that light enters the camera. It's in fractions of a second. So here's a hands-on. Set your shutter speed to 160 if you are indoors, or 1/250th of a second if you're outdoors. For those of you with point-and-shoot cameras or cell phone cameras, you can pick the icon that best describes what you need. So if you want fast motion, you want to freeze the motion, you can pick a shutter speed of 250th using that sports icon. If you want a slower shutter speed for shooting indoors, you can do the portrait icon, which is about a 60th of a second. So there are various symbols for the exposure. Here you can see the portrait is designed to produce a soft background. Landscape, everything in the image is in focus from front to back. A child has a faster shutter speed because the child you want to freeze action so they're not blurred. That's also true for sports. It selects a faster shutter speed to capture moving objects without blur. Here's an exposure quick start guide. Has all kinds of different symbols and letters. Just think of those letters like P is for program, M is for manual. You can Google this and find that guide for your own reference. More symbols and what they mean. There are program settings on some cameras. P is the programmed mode. A is for aperture priority. S is for shutter priority. And M is for manual. And so we want to set our cameras to M, where we control both the shutter speed and the f-stop. Our exposure meter is what reads the light. We can activate the meter by pushing the shutter. Some cameras display this information on the bottom of the viewfinder. Point and shoot cameras generally don't provide a meter reading. So here's a hands-on. Activate your meter by turning on the camera. Slightly depress the shutter. For cell phone users, you may need to just touch the screen. But what's important, don't push the shutter all the way down or you'll take a picture. Focus. We want to manually focus on our subject. We place the focusing area on an important part of the scene. Focus on your subject and depress the shutter button. Cell phone user, touch the screen and indicate where you want the focus to be. The focusing ring allows you to adjust the focusing ring to make your subject sharp. It's important that our main subject be sharp because that helps us as viewers focus on that area. You may have a focus indicator in your camera, and some have a green dot, and some cameras won't take a picture if it's not in focus. There's a split screen focus on some cameras. You can see here where the split screen shows the face is kind of in two, and then when it's in focus, it comes together as one. Or here you see the hand is split in half, and then when it's in focus, it becomes one. Some cameras have crystal focus where the crystals become sharp. Here you can see that more clearly where the flower is sharp on the left and it's out of focus on the right. So here's a hands-on. Adjust your focus ring to make your subject sharp. That's especially true for you DSLR shooters. If you have a point and shoot, lightly depress the shutter and lock the focus and then recompose the scene. White balance. It's the process of removing unrealistic color casts so that objects that appear white in person are rendered white in your photo. Proper camera white balance has to take into account the color temperature of a light source. This refers to the warm or coolness of white light, like the sun or room lights. Here's an example of white balance. We can place our camera on auto, and generally that's fine. Sometimes though, if we're under a tungsten, if we are under that lighting source and we set it to tungsten and that's incorrect, it'll look rather blue. If we're indoors and we're using room lights, but it's just set to daylight, well then the subject can look kind of yellow. So here are some white balance choices. If you have these on your camera, you may want to choose that you're shooting in daylight or that you're shooting in tungsten light. Tungsten light is when you're inside, and that's the light bulbs that we have in our house. That's tungsten. Fluorescent light is those tubes, and that creates a rather red tone. And those are often found in offices or at school. Here's some more indicators for your white balance choices. Incandescent is just that room light. Fluorescent, again, are those tubes. You've got sun. So we want to be sure to turn off our flash. We want to control our camera. Flash tends to flatten out the subject. Flash is also only good for about 6 feet. So find the setting for your camera and turn off your flash. If you don't have control of it popping up, you could put a Kleenex over the flash to soften it. Remember, make yourself into a tripod. This allows you to avoid camera shake, and you can hold your camera like a professional. You'll shoot better pictures. See D2L for the video demo. How about these camera positions for holding your camera? Which is correct? Well, the one on the left, where the camera is resting on the platform of your hand, allows you to be nice and steady. So holding steady, you want to put your palm up and rest the lens on your palm of your hand. Pull your elbows in and have your feet slightly spread apart for balance. So take control. Whatever controls you have on your camera, take control. Use the ones you have to make the best photographs possible.